Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody, welcome to the show. This is episode 35. And I've got a really good one for you today. I actually managed to get an interview with Nick Osipczak, who's a former MMA professional fighter who also practices Tai Chi Chuan, has a bunch of other stuff going on. And I thought he was a very interesting guy to interview, and it's thanks to one of my patrons, Lars, who brought him to my attention. So you've got that to look forward to. Before we get started, a quick shout out to one of my patrons. I want to give a huge thanks to Hossein Boyafsar, who's been one of my patrons for almost 2 years now. I think next month is 2 years. And we actually met during one of my seminars a few years ago in the Netherlands. And since then, he's been pretty much supporting me. So I want to give a huge thanks to him, because it's, again, as I always say, thanks to people like Hossein and all my other patrons that this podcast and everything else is possible. So thanks again, man. You rock. So that said, if you also want to join the fun and games that we have over on Patreon, go to patreon.com/WimDemeere, my name. I'll put the link in the show notes as usual, and then you can check it out and support the show. So that said, before we get started with the interview, if you want to find all the links of the things that Nick and I talk about in this episode, go to wimsblog.com/35. 35, the number 35, wimsblog.com/35. If you go there, then you will find everything that we mentioned. That's it. Let's get on with the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. And I have a very special guest today, Nick Osipczak. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. And I want to, again, thank you for being on the podcast. I know you're quite a busy man, lots of stuff that you're doing nowadays. But I was very interested in talking to you for a variety of reasons. The first one is obviously you're an accomplished martial artist, but on the other hand, you followed a path that is pretty similar to my own. You started with Kung Fu, you competed in Kinda, which for the people who don't know is full contact competition, but looks a little bit like Kyokushinkai competitions. No punching to the head, but kicking to the head is allowed, and so on. I did that too, and then competed in Sancho. You went to MMA, and now you do Tai Chi Chuan, which is very, very similar to my path. But now you've gone on to this whole new career. So it seems that you offer health retreats, you run a CBD company, you have very interesting paintings that you make. So looks like you're an extremely busy man. I want to touch on all those things, and obviously if you want to interject something that you want to point out, please do so. But the main thing that I want to start with is you started with Kung Fu. Could you talk a little bit about the style you started with?
Yeah, so it was a form of Shaolin, Hung Gar it was called, or Hung Quen. There's a few different names. These styles are so many and so old that, well, as they spread throughout the world, sometimes the names change a little bit depending on the teacher.
Yeah. And how many years did you practice that style?
Of Shaolin.
Yeah.
Just 2 years.
Okay.
So I started when I was 18. I started university, and I thought it was time to, I don't know, I kind of always wanted to take up a martial art, but I never got round to it. None of my family were into martial arts. So university is a time for new beginnings and find some independence, find out what you like. So I took it up then. And immediately it was great because my body was being challenged and tested in new ways. And there was a lot to learn. So straight away, I started gradually increasing how many times a week I was training. And presented a big challenge, and then obviously you start to compete, and then that opens up a whole load of new challenges. But 2 years, because at the end of that 2 years, I decided that I wanted to move on to more of a challenge, which was the MMA, because I felt that you were being tested in more ways. The risk of competition was greater, so you had more pressure. And obviously I was started to watch it a lot, and you started to see style v styles. So by that point, my mind was too curious. I realized I needed to train in more than just one style to be well-rounded.
Yeah. What was the transition like when you went from the Kung Fu training and that kind of competition that you did there to the MMA training and that competition format?
Well, it was like being a beginner again because I was not prepared at all for any of the wrestling or the ground fighting. So I had a little bit of basics with the stand-up, at least as far as distancing and timing. So even though I was not experienced with punch to the head, at least I could keep my distance more at the kicking range, so it made them harder to land the punches. But yeah, that was as far as I went. I had to start as a complete beginner from the wrestling and ground fighting.
Nick, I think we have a little bit of wind blowing into your microphone because there's some feedback here. I don't know if you...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this should be better now.
Yeah, this is much better. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, I understand the transition, how rough it can be sometimes. Having experienced the first time that I went up against a boxer, he owned me totally. He just punched me around like I was a child.
Yeah.
But I wonder, could you maybe talk a little bit about the things that did work for you when you came, that you already learned in the hangar? Were there some things that you could take with you and apply in the MMA format?
Well, the main thing about the hangar, the way you train and the way you compete, is you're trying to kick the other person in the head.
Yeah.
Which is not that easy to do when that is the main thing they're trying to stop. So that makes you much better at it. So suddenly when you're up against someone who is looking out for punches, who's looking out for takedowns, then they're putting less of their attention on just blocking the head kick. So suddenly it makes it easier to kick him in the head in some ways.
Yeah.
So that's the main advantage I had. Obviously, as well, you spend a lot of time stretching in the traditional martial arts. So my flexibility for the kicks was greater than most MMA fighters because they've got so much stuff to train in. They don't spend much time stretching, and they're lifting a lot, and generally the flexibility is quite poor in them. So comparatively, their kicks are quite poor because they just don't have the flexibility for them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what stood out to me when I watched your fights is that for a tall fighter, obviously, fighting from the outside was more interesting, but you also seemed comfortable striking at closer range with hooks and uppercuts. So was that something you specifically worked on because you knew it would be an issue, or is it just something that you found out that you were naturally good at?
Well, that would have come from the boxing and the Muay Thai, not from the Kung Fu. They don't really, at least in my experience, we didn't do much about the shorter range strikes, the hooks and stuff. Maybe we would have got to that later, but, generally the way you train is built around the competition rules and setting.
Yeah.
So certainly in point fighting, it's much more about the long range strikes, the way to score a point. So it's just about what you're preparing for.
Yeah. And something else that I noticed is that you had a really good grasp of range and controlling the distance between you and your opponent as you tried to hit them from a distance. And one of the things that I noticed was your footwork, and also the way that you would consistently extend your techniques to optimal range. So that might be, for instance, I'm blanking out on which opponent it was exactly, but that you would throw a kick or a punch from range and immediately regain the distance again. But also when you would blitz him and storm forward, you would fully extend your straight punches so that you didn't need to come any closer than necessary. So is that something that you work specifically on, or how did that kind of thing, how did you develop those kind of skills?
Yeah, that's mostly from pad work. You need a good... Make sure you're always at the correct range, and you... Hello? Can you hear me?
we lost you there. You said that's from Pagua, and then you were...
Pad work. Pad work.
Yep. Oh, pad work.
So hitting the pads. Yeah. So if you got the right stance and footwork, they will build that into your game over time.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's great, because it's one of the things that I like to emphasize as a coach as well. You've noticed this as well, I guess, is that in the very early days of the UFC, it was basically a bunch of brawls towards what we have nowadays, which is a lot more strategic and tactic, and the footwork from the early days is very different from nowadays. It's a lot more similar to like you see in boxing, Muay Thai, and so on. So I always like the fighters like you who have good footwork and just work at appropriate range with the appropriate techniques, as opposed to maybe the younger fighters or the more inexperienced ones. They just start brawling it out and trying to beat each other up, and just be tougher than the other guy. And don't get the impression that was kind of your strategy at all.
No, see, I was never an athlete as such. I was never a fighter as such. So I was coming at it from a much more technical, artistic point, and trying to take as little damage as possible.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I also liked about the way you fought is that you seemed to be very comfortable in the cage. I mean, you always stayed very composed. For instance, you'd back your opponent up into the cage, and then you'd maintain overview by mixing up the strikes, looking for openings, going for the body shot instead of just hitting into his closed guard, or just unloading until they fall. So that was one of the things that I know it's difficult to teach, but do you think that's also the pad work, or maybe coming from a different background?
Actually, that I had before fighting. My background was in poker, card playing.
Okay.
So I had to become calm in pressure situations where there's high pressure and stress. I had to stay calm and maintain a calm expression, calm emotions, and maintain my awareness on what was going on, so I can utilize the correct strategy for the moment. So definitely that helped me a lot when it came to my fighting. I always admired the famous fighters who would stay calm in their fights, and I was never really attracted or appealed towards, the crazy fighters who would just fight on adrenaline and aggression.
Yeah. And how would you train something like that? Staying calm and composed like you did, taking that experience from
one good way would be to use cold water, for example, and you just have to calm the mind as quickly as you can and control the breath. And so you're exposing yourself to these stressful situations, but you're overriding the automatic response to want to panic, or your heart rate goes up, or your breathing goes up, and everything is telling you to get out of there. But you know really that you're safe ultimately in a cold shower or a cold bath, and you just gradually build up your tolerance and resistance to it. And if that becomes easy, then you take it into a different environment where, again, you're putting yourself deliberately under pressure or stress, and just maintaining your equanimity.
Yeah. And would it be something that you would advise a fighter to start with very early on, or do you need a little bit more experience and maturity before you can actually develop that? Definitely. I'm a parent now, so it's something I develop in my kids from the moment they're born, because it's a life skill. You don't want to be panicking in anything, because then you make your bad decisions. Yeah. So if you can just keep your calm and keep your cool under any situation, that's going to really benefit you in your whole life, not just in your martial arts. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's one of the questions that you often hear people, especially when they want to start competing, but also from a self-defense perspective, is how do you handle the fear and the emotion, the adrenaline? Could you talk maybe a little bit about that? What was it like, stepping in the cage for the first time? Did you manage to apply all those lessons that you already had from maintaining your composure and your calm, or was it still? Go ahead.
Nothing's ever going to go perfectly in that in the cage, in that kind of environment, because there's so many.
Yeah.
Is going. So all you can do is prepare yourself the best you can, and got to put yourself in situations, so many difficult situations in training, that comparatively the fight is actually going to be easier for you than the training.
Yeah.
So, for example, first you start with light sparring with people Then you graduate to hard sparring with people you know. Then you graduate to light sparring with people you don't know. Then you graduate to hard sparring with people you don't know. Then you'll practice fighting in a cage in the gym, if you can get hold of one. So by the time you're actually doing it on the night, the only real difference is there's a bigger audience, a bigger crowd. But you can, you can maybe train, visualize and set the intent to block that out, or maybe you decide to utilize that energy and try to get it to heighten your performance. But either way, you've done so much training, so much preparation that it's not that much different on the actual fight night.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a great way to go about it. And just one more question about that. You mentioned this in another interview as well. Is that I think it was your last fight where your opponent broke your orbital, and I was pretty much on the first punch that was thrown in the fight. So I can imagine that I mean, obviously you feel that there's a problem. Adrenaline takes care of a lot of pain, but I mean, I'm sure you were aware that there was something really bad going on there.
Yeah, because my sight, I had lost my ability to see properly because the eyeball had dropped down a bit, and so everything was triple vision. Yeah,
that's horrible. Can you talk a little bit about what went through your mind? How did you manage to keep on fighting and actually obviously beating your opponent?
Well, the thing is, that was my last fight, and I had 5 years off before that fight.
Yeah.
And I had put everything in. I had put so much energy into preparing for that return that essentially I had no other option but to win that fight. And I trained my whole being to win that fight. So that it never crossed my mind, even when I sustained that injury, that there was no idea of quitting. Quitting wasn't an option.
Yeah.
And I just knew I could still win that fight. All I had to do was adjust my strategy, and I couldn't rely on my sight, so I needed to clinch him, make physical contact, so I could run my body and I could rely on the touch. And it took me maybe another 30 seconds or so to get hold of him. I was quite lucky because he made a mistake and he actually clinched me.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of the end for him. But as I say, losing was not an option, and I just had to switch up the strategy. And normally, the difference between the professionals and, let's say, the semi-professionals or the amateurs is the professional has a lot of different tricks up his sleeve, a lot of different ways to win. He could try 9 different ways, and he'll be losing them all. But eventually, he finds that 10th way, which gives him the advantage, and he can win.
Yeah. Is that something you specifically worked on as you were preparing for opponents? Like you say, having different ways of fighting them, different tactics and strategies, or was it more?
Yes, it happens naturally for your training. Let's say any sport you play, let's say tennis, maybe you start by playing at the back of the court and that's not working. So then you play more at the front of the court, or maybe you play just to the opponent's backhand, That will come over the years. You learn, you can vary your style and your strategy, and you just tilt the game in the direction where you have the advantage more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you just mentioned it that you went away from the sport for a few years and then came back for that fight. But overall, you had a relatively speaking short career in MMA. Could you talk a little bit about why you walked away and started doing other things?
Well, it was never my goal or dream when I was a child at fighting. So I kind of just found myself doing it because I was enjoying it and learning a lot along the way.
Yeah.
But after a few years of doing it and reaching the UFC, so getting to fight at the top level and see what it's all about and get some traveling in, the passion and the enthusiasm was starting to disappear. And you need to put yourself every day through that kind of training. You need to be passionate about it. It's got to be a desire deep within you. Otherwise, you cannot fake it. And if you fake it, you get exposed in the ring. And near the end, I was realizing it wasn't coming from deep within, and I was doing it because maybe the lifestyle was nice, but the fighting wasn't nice. So lifestyle meant I could travel, I could hang out with friends, I could train, I could learn. But at the end of the day, it's still a job, so you still have to fight 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
And near the end, the enthusiasm was going down more and more, and I was trying to fake it. I was trying to motivate myself in ways to push myself as hard as I needed to. But eventually I started to cut some corners at the end because it wasn't a genuine desire. And then it started to show in the cage. So in the end, I realized, okay, it's time to move on. I'm still so young. I've still got lots to do. Let's find something else I'm passionate about. And that's how it went.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way of thinking about it. It's a dangerous sport, just as many other martial arts competitions are. But if you aren't in there at 100%, that's taking maybe a little bit too many risks that could end really badly. Especially at the level that you were fighting, that was the highest level. So even small mistakes can lead to horrible consequences.
Yeah, it only takes one shot to do some real damage.
Yeah.
And I see it all the time now that I'm out of the sport. I can very easily identify fighters who are not fully motivated when they're in there. They're not trying their best. They're not doing everything they can to win at every moment of the fight. And I think it's a bit of a shame that those guys are still doing it. And a lot of those guys are doing it because they think they have no other options.
Yeah, no, true. So you had your orbital broken. Did that heal up correctly? Any other lingering injuries from your career?
Thank goodness it's healed up now. It took maybe 6 months. It actually broke in 2 different places, and I had to have 2 surgeries. So it was worrying at times, but thank goodness it's all back to fine now. That was the first and last major injury I ever got. So I'm quite fortunate. Of course, there's some wear and tear on the rest of the body, particularly some of the joints that comes with too much extreme external training. But overall, I'm in very good health and I feel very lucky. Okay,
that's good to hear. Do you still do some MMA type training regularly, or what? Is that still a part of your schedule?
No, very rarely. Every now and again, I will just, if someone wants to do some sparring or some training, I might do it, but it's been a few months at least, and it gets less and less every year.
Okay, no, I understand that. And that kind of brings me to the second topic, is that, if I remember correctly, you took up Tai Chi Chuan near the end of your MMA career. Is that correct?
So I was 26. I had stopped fighting, and then I did the fight when I was 30.
Okay. What style do you practice? What style of Tai Chi do you do?
Yang style.
Okay. And how did you come, from making that switch from MMA to Tai Chi?
Well, actually, I had read about it. I read some books, and then when I was 26, I had an experience where I felt I saw what Tai Chi was talking about and energy and stuff like that. So after that experience, I knew I wanted to focus on it and study it as much as I could. So immediately I switched all my energy into the pursuit of understanding Tai Chi as much as possible.
Okay. And what was that transition like? Because that's the second transition, coming from hardstyle Kung Fu to MMA, switching from that towards Tai Chi, which is another paradigm shift. What was that experience like, just making this new change in direction?
Well, it was completely different type of training. And also what I noticed was the first couple of years in particular, it was mostly about my body kind of healing itself from all the previous damage and rebalancing it out. So the first 2 years, my main memory is of like rebalancing the body and making it more healthy.
Yeah. And what is your practice nowadays like when it comes to Tai Chi?
So nowadays, mostly it's in the morning I loosen my joints, make sure everything is mobile, and then I do some standing practice, and then I do some foundational movements and some form. And every now and again I do some push hands practice with some friends or students, but mostly that's it. The priority for me is always the joint loosening just to stay healthy, and the standing practice.
Yeah. And do you also practice the self-defense applications?
No.
No.
Very rarely. I mean, that's part of the push hand drills, but very rarely. It's not something so much that interests me. It's not something I really feel I need.
Yeah.
But that kind of develops on its own in the background the more I feel I do all the other basic stuff.
Yeah. And I think you do teach some Negung or Qigong exercises as well?
Yeah. I teach a bit of everything, but for me, a lot of the time I have to speak with an individual and see where they're at and where they want to go.
Yeah.
Mostly the interest for me is just helping someone understand their body more, their mind more, energy more, and achieving whatever goals it is more in their everyday life, rather than making them just better at self-defense or whatever. That stuff is, for me, not that interesting anymore. It kind of happens naturally along the way.
Yeah.
I don't live in an area where I don't live in an area where you're not under physical threat.
Yeah.
So it's not really on the front of my mind.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And do you see the way that if you were to teach MMA now, I know it's not on the table, but if you were to, would you blend some of the Tai Chi experience into that kind of training, or keep it? Okay.
Yeah. So when I was like 29, 30, I was teaching some MMA and introducing these concepts, but there were some problems. The first problem was these guys, the MMA guys, all they want to do is get ready to fight better in a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
So they have to prioritize what they're spending their time on. They're not thinking in terms of their health. They're not thinking in terms of 5 years down the line. They just need to improve.
Hello?
Improve their skin.
I lost you for a little bit there. Yeah, I lost you for a second. Go ahead.
What I had to offer, it didn't really suit their needs, and they weren't really at the stage of life where they were aware that there were benefits to be had for their health and for life outside of the cage.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a shame because, I mean, I think when it comes to longevity in MMA, something like that might be very helpful, along with a host of other things, obviously. But also on a practical level, I have one of my students who practiced Tai Chi with me for a long time. We do a lot of push hands. And when he went to BJJ class, the hand fighting, he had a tremendous advantage there. And he said that like even the higher belts had a lot of trouble getting his hands on him. Once they got a hold of him, it was a different game, but because that was where he had a lot to learn still. But he found that the sensitivity that you get from push hands training was extremely applicable when it comes to something like hand fighting, and obviously being aware of where your balance is and so on is a critical skill in MMA as well. Yeah,
no, definitely my ground fighting went up a great deal after some time practicing Tai Chi. It increased my sensitivity, my ability to manipulate their body, and my overall balance and strength and flexibility. Yeah, I definitely noticed a lot of improvements.
Okay, great. Well, I want to touch on a few more things during the interview, and that is also the art. So you are also a painter, and you seem to have a very strong focus on what's called sacred geometry. And in the show notes, I'll put some links for people so that they can find out more. But I noticed that you have the Pakwa symbol on your site on your website as a main theme. Is that where it started? Your interest in the geometry, or is it somewhere else?
No, the interest in geometry really came from the same experience I was talking about earlier, which pointed me more towards Tai Chi and energy in general. Go on.
Now, could you talk a little bit about that experience, if you like?
Okay, so I've mentioned it in previous podcasts. It's quite difficult to talk about, but essentially it was ayahuasca, or plant medicine called ayahuasca, which is from the Amazon rainforest, and it just helps you connect with, I don't know how to say, but it gives you some new experiences and it helps you see things in a new way.
Yeah.
So for me, a lot of the information I was being shown was coming in these geometric patterns.
Yeah.
And that really piqued my interest in it. And then I went away to study it more. And obviously the Tai Chi yin yang symbol was very powerful, had a powerful impact on me. And obviously the Bagua is tied in as well, which is the one I'm using now for my logo for the brand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for the listeners, I mean, ayahuasca is it's like you say, it's difficult. I haven't experienced it, but I have talked to people who have. It's very, very difficult to explain. So I'm just going to put a link in the show notes and let people explore that instead of trying to explain it here for the both of us. I don't think that's going to be very practical. But it obviously had a very significant effect on you and in your art. And one of the reasons why I find it interesting is because when you look at the golden ratio and all the related things to sacred geometry, you've got the Fibonacci sequence and so on. That's even linked to the planetary movements of our solar system. You can find the Fibonacci sequence there as well. So it's very strange for people who are not introduced to this topic. But there's also a link to martial arts. When you look at the 13 tactics in Tai Chi, the 8 powers and the 5 steps, which is linked to the Bagua. You've got in Western fencing the old manual from Thibaut, the mysterious circle, where you can see in the manual, you see the geometrical patterns just drawn in front of you. So do you explore that link as well? Or is it mainly in your art, or do you also look at it from a martial arts perspective?
Well, that and more for me, because these patterns are everywhere, not just martial arts, not just paintings, everywhere. As you said, movements of the planets. So I see them in all places, and I do certainly try. The deeper my understanding of the internal martial arts goes, the more I become aware of where the patterns are. And essentially, you're trying to move the energy along those pathways because it's more efficient. So Tai Chi, yoga, all these things, they're trying to help you align the body, the mind, and the spirit. So by studying these patterns from all different angles helps me understand it a little more quickly, hopefully.
Okay. And how much time can you devote to the painting? Because you sounds like you're pretty busy with everything you do. So is that a daily thing, something that you do?
No, not now. The paintings, probably between 3 years ago. That was my period where I was painting heavily. But now I have 3 children and I'm running this hemp company. So
yeah. Oh, you broke up there again. Nick.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Go ahead. You said you had 3 children. I was saying,
the painting mostly I did when I had my first child. I had more time and spent many hours a day. Some of the paintings would take me 100 hours each. But now my creative outlet is coming more from the packaging and branding and product designing for the hemp company.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a place where we can send people to see the paintings you did?
Everything can be found on the website. That's raisedspirit.com, RAISEDSPIRIT.com, Raised Spirit. And that's got the painting, that's got some information on my Tai Chi and martial arts teaching, and also all the hemp products on it.
Okay. And I just want to mention that, I mean, you hold the health retreats, if I'm not mistaken, several times a year. Could you explain a little bit what you do there and who might be interested in that?
Yeah, so it used to be more often, but now it's once or twice a year only. And okay. Who's it suitable for? It's suitable for people who are interested in improving their health and who are interested in longevity and martial arts. it's not the main focus of it, but if you're a martial artist, your skills will develop as a result of the knowledge you're exposed to, and showing a different way to train where you can get more out of it without feeling exhausted physically and draining your body. And people who want to learn how to bring more creativity and make a positive change in their life where they can manifest whatever they're trying to bring about. Yeah. So everyone has an idea of what they want to do or where they want to go, but not everyone has such a clear idea on how to make it happen.
All right, and how people just get in touch with you via the website and sign up for one of the retreats? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so the next one will be in October in England, and after that it will be in the spring or summer. But yeah, you can just send an email across or check out when I have the dates up there, subscribe to the newsletter, and I will just keep everyone updated with the dates.
Okay, and for the listeners, I will put a link in the show notes directly to the page on your website where they can find out more information about retreats. And that brings me kind of to the final topic that I wanted to talk to you about a little bit. You mentioned you have a hemp company, so you sell hemp products. How did you get involved with that? And just a little bit more about that part of your business.
Well, going back to the ayahuasca experience, that is a plant medicine, and straight away it showed me how powerful it is. Plants can be for our healing, both physical, mental, spiritual. Hemp is part of the cannabis family. A lot of athletes, especially martial artists, are using cannabis to help heal their bodies after the tough training sessions. It can help improve their sleep. It can also help them switch off in the evenings instead of drinking alcohol, because the athletes don't want to do that. So I was already familiar with the healing properties, but then the more I researched it, the more I found out the whole plant can be used and for many different products and uses, such as clothing, paper, building material, fuel. It's fantastic for the environment. It grows really quickly, and it's normally superior than a lot of the common alternatives. So hemp textile is better than cotton, and hemp paper is better than tree paper. So my goal is just to keep spreading awareness of how you can choose these better options, which are also much better for the planet. And I want to just keep putting out more grow hemp and put out more hemp products, so everyone can benefit and the planet can benefit too.
And is it you have your very own company? Do you also have you grow the plants yourselves, or how does that work?
At the moment, no. In England, we're a little bit backwards when it comes to the licensing, but things are changing all the time. And hopefully from 2020, I will start growing it myself in England.
Oh, okay, yeah. In Belgium, it's very similar. We're also a little bit backward here. I started using CBD oil a few months ago for inflammation and for better sleep, and I have to say it's had an effect. Feel better, sleep better, and feel less of the inflammation. So I know it's a little bit controversial still nowadays because of all, historically speaking, obviously hemp has been frowned upon. It's a complex subject, not necessarily for the right reasons. People want to go look into the history, they'll find that there's a lot of politics involved, obviously, and big business and lots of money. But anyway, I think it was very interesting to get started on that and experience it myself and find it very beneficial. Now, you mentioned that this is something a lot of MMA fighters are using nowadays too. Is that correct?
Well, the MMA community, but also any high-impact sports such as NFL and, where they're taking a lot of damage to the body, they use cannabis for years. Whether they're allowed to or not, they were using it because they needed it to recover. And not everyone wants to take the artificial stuff and the painkillers, so people want the natural option. Yeah. So they've been using it a long time, but now with CBD is allowed in all the sports because it doesn't have the THC, so it doesn't get you high. Yeah. So everyone is using it now, but also, as you said, the perception of it is changed in the public eye as well, and every country is using it more and more now. and people are using it for all sorts of conditions. It could be anxiety, depression, skin problems, diabetes, everything. It's helping so many different conditions that it can't be ignored anymore. And certainly, if you haven't heard of it before this interview, you're going to start seeing it pop up everywhere. And even all the pharmaceutical companies are starting to get on board and put out their own CBD products.
And what kind of products are you offering right now in your shop and with your company?
So we got the hemp protein powders. It's phenomenal. If you're taking any protein powders already, you want to start to research hemp, because you'll realize it's superior and it's completely natural. And then we've got the CBD range. We've got the droppers, which you put under your tongue. We've also infused it in coconut oil, which is the most powerful way to take it. This one you can put in your tea and coffee. You can eat it straight from the jar. You can also put it on your skin. We've got the CBD cosmetics range, like the body balm. And we even do cacao, which is like a natural chocolate flavors.
All right. And you have any other plans or new products coming out soon, or anything that you can talk about?
Yes, so many. The problem is just the time, because I would love to do it all straight away, but each product you got to develop it and test it. But the next ones coming out are the CBD massage oil, and we have a hemp bag coming out.
Nice, excellent. All right. Well, Nick, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover with you. So your website is raisedspirit.com. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes for everybody. Anywhere else you want people to check you out online, or anywhere else they need to go to see what you're doing?
If they just go to the website, everything else will be linked. The Instagram and Facebook will be linked, but just get to the website. That's the easiest.
All right. Anything you want to say? Any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank you for having me on your show today. And all I want to say to the martial artists out there who are listening specifically for that is that if you want to learn martial arts so you can actually fight and you can fight, then there's only one way, and that is to test it through sparring. Do not go fooling yourself thinking you are an excellent fighter if you haven't repeatedly tested and taken many beatings.
All right, excellent. Okay, that's it. I want to thank you too, Nick, and again for the listeners, thank you for listening to this interview. I will, as I said, put everything that we talked about, all the links in the show notes, and you can read all that there. Then, okay, take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
And that's it, guys. I want to thank, first of all, Nick for taking the time to talk to me and do this interview. And as I mentioned before, go to wimsblog.com/35, the number 35. And then you will find all the links that I mentioned, links to Nick's website and so on. Check that out, check out his stuff, and I'm sure you'll like it a lot. So that said, this is the end of the show. I've got another one coming up in about 2 weeks, and I want to thank you all for listening. If you want to help out, please share this episode with everybody who you think might be interested. And obviously you can subscribe on iTunes and even on Spotify. We're all over the place with podcasts, so be sure to do that too. I want to thank you very much, and I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.